Welcome back to Insights at DDLynn Designs, a unique twist in the ancient art of wire. So I've had a lot of requests regarding weaving, and I've noticed all over social media that a lot of up-and-coming, artists, beginning in this ancient art of wire, are struggling a lot with weaving, and that's really just part of the journey as we first began to take on this magical art. So I thought I would do a very detailed video for beginners on wire weaving. And this is going to entail the gauges of wire that you're going to use, and we're going to be wrapping 2 and then 3 pieces of wire. So the first thing I did is I cut myself some wire to start with. So I want to talk about the wire. So this is 20 gauge. And 20 gauge is a much softer wire. So when we're first starting out, we typically start out with 20 gauge because it's easier to manipulate and shape. However, it's a little bit harder. I actually started out with 18 gauge. I didn't know anything. I'm self-taught, so I didn't really know the directions to go, and I really got frustrated with the few tutorials that I actually found 4.5 years ago where they didn't really go through the details, hiding your wire, tucking your wire, getting rid of the little nibs, the little Sharpies, because you do not want to bring anything to market that's going to poke, your client. So that's really, really critical when we're wire weaving. So we're going to talk about tension and spacing and using different gauges of wire from 30 gauge to 28 gauge to 26 gauge. These are our standard weaving wires. Now you can move upwards. I've weaved with 22, 20, I've even wrapped with 28 over a 14 gauge wire. And I got to tell you, that's really tough. So we're going to be focusing on the 3 major weaving wires. Again, that's 30, 28, and 26. We're going to be wrapping so that you can see more detail with 20 gauge. And so you can see the difference when you're wrapping, how soft this wire is and how easy it is to bend it. So it's much harder to learn on. And then 18 gauge, and then of course 16 gauge. So one of the things that you want to do is try to get your wire as straight as possible. So here's a really good tip. I'm always going to giving you techniques. You can use a wire spool, you can use nylon jaw pliers, or you can use a flat nose, and let me find a good flat nose plier. So I'm going to go through those about straightening your wire. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about the 20 gauge because that's a really soft wire, right? So you can see the waves in this wire right now. So you can either use your hand, but what happens when we use our hands without equal pressure is we tend to bow the wire. So if you don't want to use your hand, for example, if you bent your wire like this, you could straighten it with your plier. So here's the example with the plier. You want to hold tension underneath where your bend is, and you just want to gently press in the opposite direction and go up and down that wire. Then the same thing from the side. You're just shaping that wire and straightening it out. So that's certainly much straighter than that bend is. So that's one technique. The second technique is to take your nylon jaw pliers and to put your wire in the plier and try to hold it as level as possible. And then you can go up and down that wire to straighten it out. But because of the way our hands are designed, we have a tendency to bow the wire. See the bow in it? So you have to keep working it. You can also use a cloth. So here's what happens when we're holding the end. We tend to bend our end a little bit. And that's okay because you might be cutting that off anyway. So here's another technique. You can use a very heavy spool of wire and you can simply go up and down that wire and it will straighten it out perfectly. Now you can't have sharp bends in it to do this, but, and it can't be like so long because what will happen is the wire will tend to want to bend on the bottom, and you can feel it while you're underneath it, straightening it out. So it really straightens that wire out. So let's do this one for an example. See the bow in this wire? So I'm going to start in the middle, and then I'm going to work my way up and down that wire, and I'm on the plastic side of this. There we go. So I'm just working my way up and down that wire. Now, if you have a big spool of wire like this, you'll have more area to go up and down the wire, and you'll have much more control on straightening it out. So we're just going to straighten these wires out. Now we're going to start our weaving. Because we're going to start with the 20 gauge, which is the softest wire, and also, you guys, by straightening your wire with the spool, you harden the wire, so it gives you a little bit more control. So when we're weaving, and especially when we're starting out, you always want to give yourself a tail. So let me get off of here. This thing looks a wee bit tangled. It is. Don't know what's going on here. So I'm going to actually cut this wire out. It's very, very soft wire. So 30 gauge is really soft and very susceptible to snapping easily, especially when you're using your pliers on it. So let me just wrap this again and then cut myself. I'm going to cut myself 12 inches. I typically work off the spool when I can. Sometimes you can't, depending on the design that you're making. So there's several things that you can do to control your wire. You can, number one, tape your ends. You can use a painter's tape or a very low residue masking tape. So when you go to the hardware store, if you don't want to use painter's tape, you can ask them for a low residue or a low stick, a very low stick masking tape. So here's one way that you can start your weaving to control your wires is you can come down to the bottom and you can tape them. So here's another tip. Round wire will roll on itself. It is the nature of the wire versus square wire has four sides. So it's got an edge, but four sides. So this way you can control your wire a little bit more. You can also use what's called a ring clamp. So this is going to be very detail oriented, you guys. So it's probably not going to do much for a advanced student. But anyways, what you can do is you can come in, so you open up this ring clamp like this, and it's got leather inside of it to keep from dinging into your wire. And then you just can put your clamp in here like this. And then it's got a little wedge on the back, and you just simply put the wedge in and start weaving. So you can use this as well. You can also use, if I can find it, this is another utility clamp. Okay, so there's many ways for you to keep your wires aligned and be able to control them. So you can tape them, you can put them in a ring clamp or another heavy duty clamp. This is a little awkward for me because it's got a very big handle on it. So if I'm going to be clamping my wire with it, this is round, so it nestles in my palm much better. So I'll show you the example of that, and then we'll get weaving. So if you're wanting to hold on to this and you put your wires in here, it's just very, very big and awkward, and you've got to get up inside here and figure out how you want to get your hands placed in order to control it. So I'm not very big on this. I use this for other things, but I don't clamp my wires anymore. And if I did, it would be if I was working with like 13 inches or more, and I really needed to do that to control my wires. So now we're going to talk about spacing. So when you are going to start weaving, you want to have enough spacing to slip your wire through. You don't want your wire catching, right? So one of the ways that you can determine that is simply by sliding your wire in. So I'm coming down to the number 1 wire. We're going to call these 1, 2, and 3. And just see how it feels in between, okay? So if you've got good movement, but not too much, then you're good to go. Now, another thing that you can do is, if you noticed, I kept separating these out on the top. And even though it's creating a V shape, we can adjust that as we're moving upward. So I'm going to leave myself a little 1.5-inch tail, and I'm coming in between the wires. And so to control that wire, I'm going to fold it over and fold it back. This way my wire is set. I don't have to worry about it moving. So we're going to do some coils first, and then we're going to do a pattern. So one of the things, especially when you're working with a very light gauge, is you don't have to do a lot of pulling, but you always want to set your wire up, okay? So you want to push it back to where your tape is. Now you can train your wire, because wire has memory, okay? The thinner the gauge of the wire, the more movement that you're going to have, because it's going to naturally want to slide, which is why we have this tail, so that we can hold it down. You want to keep your finger pressed firmly against the back of your wires. So we're going to roll over the top of that wire, and by doing that, we're creating memory. And then we're going to come down through, so we're in between 1 and 2, and we're just going to do some coils. Now, I use my fingernail to push that wire against the other coil, and then up, so there's your memory, and then back through. Up, and then back through. So we've created 4 coils, and then you just want to slide them back. So now we're going to work with 2 wires, and then we'll scale up to 3. So we're going to wrap over wires 1 and 2 complete rotations. And if you notice, I'm using my thumb in the back to push it. Now what can happen is your wire can pitch on an angle. So when you're first starting out weaving, just push it back. And you want to make sure that you watch your tension. You don't want to pull so hard that you're pulling your wires together. So you want to pull enough to create the tension to really rest against the surface of your core wires, and then use your finger in the back to push it down. So we're going to go over again. So that's 2 rotations, and I'm using my thumb to push it down. So just always slide your wire back. Now what we're going to do is we're going to wrap 4 coils around our number 1 wire. And if you notice, I'm always spreading these out on top a little bit. And then I'm going to show you how to straighten up. So we're going to do 1, I'm using my index finger. And you always want to stay very close to your weaving as you're moving up your wire. So roll over, drag it through, and push. Roll over, drag it through, and push. Roll over, drag it through, and push. Because again, this is such a light gauged weaving wire. So here's the thing about weaving wire. The bigger the gauge, the smaller the wire. So 30 gauge is going to be a very small wire. Then we step up to 22, it's going to have more thickness, 26, etc. So we've made our first pattern, right? So let's do that again. We're going to roll over wires 1 and 2 full rotations. As I'm coming around the back, I'm gently pulling and snugging that wire in, and then just pushing it in. And then I keep moving my hand up to stay very close to my weaving wire so that I don't jackknife my wire. So what's jackknifing your wire? When you press so hard that you literally jack it, you bend it. So you want to watch your tension, and then we're just going to roll over, push with my thumb, watch this tip on the front here, roll over, come in between these 2 wires. And I actually did 3 wraps, but that's okay, it doesn't matter. The purpose of this is to learn about tension, gap, your pulling, adjusting your wires, and controlling your weaving. So I'm going to do 4 full rotations. So this would be called a 2-4 weave or a 3-4 weave. I've got 3 full rotations around the first 2 wires here and 2 full rotations around the first 2 wires here. So now we're going to work with 3 wires, and we're going to start adjusting our wires, watching our gap space, okay? And if you notice, my hand is always moving up, and let me see if I bring my camera down. There we go. Maybe that'll be better. So now we're going to go over wires 1 and 2, and I'm pushing with my thumb in the back and sliding that wire down. And we're going to do that 3 times. Now, if you find, and here's a really good example, that your wires are starting to pull together too much, slide your wire down, and then just at the top here, grab the tip of that wire and just anchor it out a little bit. You're just giving yourself more even gap space. You can use your fingernail to slide up and down that wire to make sure that you have even gap space. And you notice this third wire up here is swinging out. That's okay. We're going to control that because we're going to be pulling it in. So now I'm going to go around the number 1 wire 2 times. Then I'm going to come up over wires 1 and 2 again 2 times. Then I'm going to come in between them. So I'm coming in between 1 and 2 and I'm pulling my wire back. Then I'm going to slide my wires together. Now I'm going to come over the top, and this is where you want to have a little more tension because we want to line these wires up, right? So I'm going to pull that wire until I can see that they're all beautifully aligned and parallel to each other. I'm holding my finger against the back, and then I'm coming back up through 1 and 2. Then I'm going to go over wires 2 and 3, and my finger is always very gently lifting up and coming back down as I'm releasing that wire. And I'll do that a little bit more slower. So now I'm going to come back around. So I'm coming around the back. I'm going to come back around, and now I'm going to start a pattern. So we're going to start a pattern here. I'm going to go over wires 1 and 2, 2 full rotations, pushing my wire around the back. I'm not yanking, okay? So I'm just pushing around the back. I'm going to go over wires 1 and 2 again. And then I'm just gently watching my gap space using my fingernail. Now I'm going to come back in between wires 1 and 2. I'm going to slide my wires together with my fingernail. Then I'm going to come over and around. Now here's a good tip when you're first starting. You can go all the way around and you've just put memory in that wire and that wire's coming out the back. And then you can bring your wire in because it's now got memory in between wires 1 and 2 to continue the 2 full rotations. Oops, I went in between wires 2 and 3. So let me get back out of that. My goodness. So here's another good tip. See how my wire here is getting in my way because it's hugging in to that second wire? Just flare that end out. Get it out of your way so you have working room. So now I'm going to come back in between, and I'm going to wrap over wires 2 and 3. So now we've got a 2-2-2 pattern. And so we're just going to do this. I'm going to bow this one out too, so I can give myself a little more working room so I can work in between my wires. So I'm coming around the back, and now I'm going to continue it. It's kind of like a checkerboard pattern. I'm coming in between wires 2 and 3, and I'm going to snug that wire up with my fingernail. Then I'm going to roll over the top because I'm coming in between and out the top. So I'm going to roll over wires 1 and 2, pushing that wire around the back, and then complete my 2 full rotations. And we're just creating like a, I forgot the name I just used. It doesn't matter. So now I'm going to continue that pattern. It's the same pattern. This time I'm coming up underneath, and I'm going to coming in between 1 and 2. And now I'm going to go over wires 2 and 3. And notice how I'm swinging this wire around the back. See the memory I created in the wire? Do you see how it's already bent? So it knows where to go. So I'm going to come back in between. I'm going to go over the top. I'm going to come back in between wires 2 and 3 using my fingernail, and my hand is always moving up. Then back over wires 1 and 2 and complete the pattern. So now I'm going to tie off. and we're going to talk about the different ways that you can tie off. So I want to look at my pattern and make sure that everything is lined up. If you've got any wires pitched off sideways or pitched in, or they're too close together because your tension is too hard, you can just use your fingers, slide the wires back, especially when you're working with a very light gauge. And then if you need to, you can just come in and straighten up your wires. So you're just tilting them up straight. And you have this beautiful, clean pattern. So now we're going to do a couple of different techniques to tie your wire off and get rid of any little pricklies that might be sticking out the back. Anytime that you have two wires together, so we're going to wrap around this bottom wire and we're going to close off. In general, most wire artists will close off 2 to 3 times, and that's 2 full rotations. So right now we have 2, okay, on the bottom. And we're going to go through this again when we start weaving on heavier gauge, because you'll be able to see it a lot better. But when we're first starting out, we always start out with a 20 gauge wire or 28 weaving or a 30. 30 is very, very easy to work with, and so is 28. So I'm going to come back in between. So you have 2 ways that you can do this. You can snap your wire, which is simply holding very, very close to the frame, okay? And you're going to do a wiggle, jiggle, until the wire snaps clean off. And you can't feel anything. It's literally broken off in between these 2 wires and completely gone. There's no little Sharpie, okay? So now let's work up. We're going to start with, and let me get rid of my 30 gauge. When we're working with a heavier gauge wire, meaning our core wires, the wires that we want to weave or wrap around with, we should go up in gauge. So I'm going to start with the 28 gauge, and I'm going to roll into my 18 gauges so that you can see the significant difference. And then we'll work with the 26 gauge on the 16 gauges. So I'm going to cut myself again 12 inches of wire. And this time, I'm not going to tape my wires, but I'm going to straighten them out a little bit because they are bowed. So I'm going to get my spool, and I'm just going to go up and down those wires. Look how beautifully straight that is. And I'm going to get this one that's got a lot of waves and little bends in it because it's coming off of a round spool. And I always start in the middle. And it really straightens that wire out. And then this one. Now we're going to talk about weaving your wire without having any tape or anything to control it. So there's a couple of ways that you can do this. You can actually use your wire to coil around your ends, okay? So you can actually make a wire strap, so to speak. So you would just simply, I don't know what my brain just did there, but I just had a little brain fart. So you can just simply take your wire. So I'm just going to roll it over the back, grab onto my tail, and I'm going to cinch my wires together. And I'm using a 28 gauge weaving wire. So you can do this. And so now I'm just going to slide that wire down to where I want to start my weave. Just sliding it down. So this is another way that you can control your wires, and it also makes a very pretty starting element. So meaning it's just a really pretty start to how you want to do your weave. So let's say that you're going to make a pendant or a bracelet and you want to roll these wires back, you can do that. So I want to show you a technique how you can close this wire off without having to go through all these wires. So meaning that tying it off on a single core wire and then cutting it. And we'll talk about that too as well, to cut your wire and how to get rid of that little sharp edge. So I'm going to back this wire out. And I'm not going to flatten my wires down yet. If you notice, they're just bowed slightly. And I'm going to use that to my advantage. I'm going to make like a little question mark. And I did a tutorial on this, strictly on how to hide your wire. Now you can feed it through with your hand, or you can use your plier. I'm going to try with my hand first, and I'm simply feeding that wire up underneath till it's coming out the top. And you want to watch that you keep a full loop. You don't want any kinks in your loop. Then I'm going to come around and I'm going to hold the wraps firmly, and I'm going to grab this tail here and I'm going to pull it through. And I'm just going to pull it until I feel that wire locked in. And so it just locked all these wires in. They're not going to go anywhere. And then I'm going to do the same technique. I'm going to stay very close to my wire, hold firmly on my wraps, and do a wiggle, jiggle, and it snaps right off and nothing is sticking out. So I want to show you how to weave your wires continuously in solid wraps, and then how to open up and start a weaving pattern. So again, I'm working on 18 gauge, and I want to line my wires up down here. So I'm simply going to put them on my mat and push them together. So they're lined up. Now again, round wire is going to want to slide up and down, and it's going to want to roll. So that's why we either tape or clamp when we're first starting out. So I'm going to come around the back, which is really now going to be my front, and I'm going to spread my wires open at the top. And I'm going to create myself my gap space, and I'm going to use my nail to open that up down here. And so we're going to do what's called a figure 8 weave. So I'm coming on top, and I'm going to roll underneath, pushing my thumb, come in between, and I'm going to push that wire down. Now there's going to be some resistance here because I closed the wires off very closely together. So I'm going to turn my wire over so I can see where my wire is in the back. And do you see the angle that it's on? And I'm going to get my pliers and I'm going to push that down, and that's going to start spreading those wires out more and opening them up. So I'm going to turn my wires back over, and here's another example. See how your wires want to roll? So as you're starting out, I would really recommend that you tape. So I'm starting off with my first rotation, and I'm going to push that wire through. I'm going to come through again. Now I'm coming around the top. I'm going to use my nail, and I'm going to roll over the second wire, and then I'm going to come back through, roll over the top again. Now I'm coming out the back, and I'm going to roll over the top wire, come back around, and we're going to start our figure 8 again. And I'm going to slide those wires down. I'm holding very firmly, and I'm rocking my plier as I'm doing that. You're going to have this gap there because of how tight the wires are, but I'm going to straighten this wire out on the bottom by lining it up with where it wants to naturally rest. So I'm anchoring my pliers off the center coils, and I'm pitching my plier to straighten that up. Then I'm going to slide these in and slide them down. There we go. Now I'm going to flatten these. So let's continue this figure 8. So I'm coming through wires 2 and 3, coming out the back, and I'm pushing that wire in. Then I'm going to roll in between, so I'm coming in between wires 1 and 2. all the way around wire 2. I'm now coming out the back. I'm going to cinch my wires together. And this one's rocking in, so I'm just pitching it up. Now I'm coming out the back. I'm going to come back in between wires 1 and 2. And I'm going to roll all the way around that wire, one full rotation, then coming out the back again. Coming back in between, over wire 2, all the way underneath it, back in between wire 1 and 2, all the way over wire 2. I'm using my thumb, cinching up, and then underneath wire 3, around wire 3, all the way around again, and then back in between. So we're doing our figure 8. So I'm coming back up underneath wire 2, over wire 2, back in between wires 1 and 2, over wire 1, 2 full rotations. I'm back up underneath, coming in between wire 1 and 2, over wire 2, in between wire 1 and 2, over wire 2, and we're coming back in between wires 2 and 3, and over wire 3. Now we're going to cut. So I'm going to do 3 full rotations, and I want to show you how to cut your wire and not have any Sharpies sticking out. So I'm going to come around one more time. I'm going to snug my wire in, and I'm going to roll the entire piece over. So now the wire is coming out the back, and I want to cut that wire. So it's all about distance. And your wire will have memory in it, and it has a tendency to spring back. So what I want to do is I want this wire to be cut on the inside so that it's not sticking out on top. You can do this a couple of ways. You can lift your wire up, and I'm going to wrap some coils again and show you that when we get into the 16 gauge. So you can lift your wire up, and I'm looking for my favorite cutters. And they're probably, oh, here they are. So I've lifted my wire up so that you can get up underneath it inside the wire so that it doesn't stick up. And I'm going to come down inside. So I'm on an angle. I'm coming down inside this wire, and I'm going to snip it. So now that little tiny nib is inside there, and it's not going to stick out on top. Then you're going to get your pliers, and you're going to come in, and you're going to grab the tip of that, and you're going to roll it. You're going to roll that wire towards the inside, and it's completely flush. There is nothing sticking up. There is no Sharpies at all. Nothing. You can't feel it at all. So let's cut some more wire, and I'll show you some different techniques. So now we're going to change the pattern, the weaving pattern. Just wanted to give you some really cool ideas of the different ways that you can weave. And I'm going to straighten these wires up. So I'm going to start, I'm not going to mess with my center wire. I'm going to mess with my outside wires. I'm simply going to bring that wire in, and I'm crossing over or under this wire. And then I'm going to straighten it up. So I brought those wires closer together. Then I'm going to turn my work over. I'm always going to get in the best possible working position so I'm not fighting that wire. And then I'm going to rock that wire to where it crosses over, and then I'm going to straighten it up. So now I have this beautiful straight line of wires. And it also creates a really unique design element. Like if you were going to make a bracelet, this would be a wonderful way to start out doing that, or a really cool pendant. You could weave in beads, and you guys can let me know what kind of weaving techniques that you want to learn. But the purpose of this is to really understand the tension, your gap space, cutting your wire, hiding your wire, you know, and just how to control your wire. So this is that little 30 gauge that I'm going to get out of. So now I'm going to get myself some more 28 gauge. And this time I'm going to work off the spool. And I'm going to create a pyramid weave off of the 3 wires. So I'm going to take my wire, Remember, we hid our wire back here so we don't have to cut it. And I'm going to run it in between the wires 1 and 2. I'm going to pull my tail down underneath towards me, and I'm going to slide this wire up. Then I'm going to wrap this wire over the top. This is how you can hold your wire and keep it from constantly sliding. So now my wire is nice and firm in there. And I'm going to come around this base wire, so I'm coming up underneath 3 times. So that's 3 full rotations. Now I'm coming around the back. And I'm going to come in between wires 1 and 2. Wires 2 and 3, and I'm going to roll over that wire, and I'm going to come back up underneath, and I'm using a good firm pressure. I'm not yanking as much as I'm telling the wire where I want it to go. So I'm coming up underneath, and now I'm going to come over the top of wires 1 and 2. Wires 2 and 3. So this is 3, this is wire 2. I'm going to come back in between. So I'm in between wires 1 and 2. I'm going to come back around the back. So I'm pushing that wire up with my thumbnail, come back in between wires 2 and 3, and I'm using my finger to slide that wire in. So if you notice, at the same time, I'm training that wire, I'm putting tension on it as I'm rocking it down and telling it where I want it to go. So that's our little pyramid. This is a 1-wire pyramid. And then I'm going to come in between wires 1 and 2 and make 3 full rotations. And again, we're using the 28 gauge off the spool. Now I'm coming around the back, and I'm moving my hand up, and this time I'm going to do 2 wraps. So I'm coming between wires 2 and 3. I'm going to roll over wires 1 and 2, and I'm training that wire and telling it where I want to go, watching my tension, making sure I'm not pulling my wires too close together. Then I'm going to come back in between wires 2 and 3. I'm going to slide my wires. Notice again, I'm anchoring off that wire and pulling it down, telling it where I want it to go. Now I'm going to come back in between wires 1 and 2 and use my finger to slide that wire up. If your wires are pitching to the left or to the right, you're pulling too hard. So just come in like this and straighten them up. Just give them a good little straighten up. Now my wire is coming out between 1 and 2. I'm going to go around wires 2 and 3. And I made a big exaggerated movement there so you can see how we put memory in that wire. So I'm coming over wires 1 and 2, watching my gap space, coming back in between, going over wires 2 and 3, coming back in between wires 1 and 2, and I'm going to roll around the top, watch my gap space, and now I've set my 2 patterns. Then I'm going to come back in between wires 2 and 3, pushing that wire in, and I'm going to roll over wires 1 and 2, coming around the back, come back in between, roll over wires 1 and 2, and then do 3 full rotations. So I'm coming around the back. So we've got our little 3-wire pyramid or petal weave, and now we've got a 2-wire petal weave. And so all you're going to do is slide your wires down, and then if it's pitching off on the top, so if you notice here, the 2 wires on top are kind of going to the right a little bit, all you need to do is just gently rock the wire in the opposite direction to straighten it up. Now, if you have any puffing in your wire, you want to very gently tap it down. So now we're going to change our weave pattern. Spread these out, make sure they stay aligned, and then we're going to cut and go into the 16 gauge. So I am going to come all the way around the back, and I'm going to come over wires. Sorry, you guys. I was just thinking about changing this pattern, so give me a minute here. I don't want to make it too complicated because you're just starting out weaving. So let's just do, this is called a modified sumac weave. So, and it doesn't really matter the name. So I'm going to come all the way around, coming out the back, over wire 3. Then I'm going to come over wires 2 and 3, back in between wires 2 and 3, over wires 1 and 2, back in between wires 1 and 2, and I completed the first rotation of patterns. Now we're going to do the same thing, but we're coming around the back. So I'm coming underneath wires 1 and 2, and I'm going to come in between wires 2 and 3. I'm going to roll all the way around wire 2, come back underneath, and come over wire 3, go back in between wires 2 and 3, and all the way around the top. And I'm pushing them together and literally training that wire. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go in between wires 1 and 2, and I'm going very slowly so you can see what I'm doing as I'm pushing and guiding that wire. Then I'm going to come back up underneath, go in between wires 2 and 3, sliding my finger in and anchoring that wire down, then pushing around the back and all the way around wire 1. And then you're going to be coming out the back again. So you're repeating that pattern. So let's do this one more time. So this is considered one set or one repeat. This is the second repeat of that pattern. So I'm going to come in between wires 2 and 3. I'm going to go over wire 2, push that wire around the back, come in between wires. Oh, I'm sorry, no. Go all the way around the back. I too even get confused. Go in between wires 2 and 3, wrap around the back and all the way over the top. And now I'm anchoring that wire again and giving it memory and telling it where I want it to go. So I'm going to go back in between wires 1 and 2, back, roll around wire 2 from the back, come back in between wires 2 and 3, anchoring that wire down, telling it where I want to go. And now I'm going to wrap 3 times and show you another way that you can cut your wire. So you know how to snap it, and you know how you can lift your wire up and pull it back and cut way down in between. Now, if you have very little room, you can take your wire, make sure that it's good and snug, okay? And then you get your pliers and you're gonna roll this wire. So you can either roll it around the back or you're just gonna roll it on the front. And I'm gonna snip as close as I possibly can. So I'm tilting my pliers down on like a 45-degree angle, pushing in between the 2 wires and snipping that wire off. I can barely feel it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this wire. So I'm going to come around the back and I'm going to roll it. You need very sharp or very small needle nose pliers, and then I'm just going to snug it in. Now you're going to see this a lot better on how to do this. I cannot feel that wire. If you feel it, here is another technique. You can get a sanding block. These are professional construction grade sanding blocks. I use them a lot. If you're new to my channel, you haven't seen me use these, I use them for everything, to get nicks out, to shape my wire, etc., scratches. You can simply go over the top and just keep buffing until you feel nothing. That's going to flatten that wire down and remove any sharp edges. So let's go ahead and move up to the 16 gauge wire. And now we're going to be using 26 gauge. So it's the same thing, but with 16 gauge, the wires are very heavy duty. So I'm going to be using heavier weaving wire. I'm going to be using 26 gauge, and you're going to see the difference of how you can't slide this wire as quickly because it's a thicker wire. You're going to have to be more methodical about how you're using your thumb and stretching your wire and anchoring your wire, because I'll give you an example. This is the 26 gauge, right? This is the 28. So it's much softer. See the spring on this? This is going to have memory much quicker. So this one's like this, where it's got more spring on the wire. So the wire is going to get memory so much faster. This is much softer, so it doesn't spring as much, and I can straighten it out a lot easier. Where with this one, I have to use more pressure. Okay? So I'm going to work off the spool. And there isn't a whole lot of wire here anyways. And I'm going to open my wires up. So you always want to give yourself gap space as you're starting out. This time, I'm going to bring my wire down. So I've got the wire on top. I'm going to roll it around the back so I can hold on to it. And then I'm going to set my first coil. So I'm just going to push that together. And 16 gauge wire is going to be, I think, easier for you to maybe practice on, because you'll be able to feel how your wire is nestling and have more control over it. But it's not going to be a wire you're likely going to start wrapping with. So now I'm going to roll over this wire again, and I'm going to do 3 full rotations. And you notice now the gap. Because this wire is a thicker gauge, you're going to have to be more methodical. So you want to line your wires up first before you start any pattern. So I'm going to do one more wrap, and this wire will slide through, but you really have to push it. You have to really be methodical about how you're controlling the wire and not yanking on it. So I'm coming around the back, and I'm going to go over wires 1 and 2. And I'm going to push this wire into position and slide it down. So I'm pushing it. Now, because it's a thicker gauge, it will have a tendency more to bow. So you can get your flat nose pliers. Where are mine? And come in on the top and just gently tap that wire down. Okay? So now we're going to go over wires 1 and 2 again. And this time we're going to come around the back. Now I'm pushing that wire and moving my hands up, and we're going to roll over. My wire's catching up here. Excuse me, you guys, I got to get out of frame to get it off the spool. So I'm rolling over, and I'm going to push. So when you're starting out, if it's easier for you, just push down on your wire. And then you've really given it good memory, and then slide it into position. I'm going to come around the back again, and I'm going to roll over all 3 of those wires again. And notice how they're separating on top. That's okay. You just come in with your plier and line it up. And if you want to, this is the tendency of round wire, you can go ahead and flatten it. It's a very gentle tap, and just snug them together. So I'm going to start giving my little 16 gauge wires some memory here to maintain their gap space, just anchoring on that a little bit. Now, I could slide my fingernail in there because I don't want to pull these too close together. So I'm going to go over wires 1 and 2. Here's another technique. You can press this wire down if you want first. You've just given it memory. And then slide it through your wires 2 and 3. And see how, because it's thicker, you have to push more than pull, and watch your tension. Then I'm pushing that wire around the back, and I'm pressing it against it. And then I'm going to roll over them again, come in between, and I'm pushing the wire, watching my gap space. Then I'm going to slide them together and then lock in. So now I'm going to roll around the bottom 3 times. Pushing that wire. See the angle on the wire? And that's because of the way I used my finger, which caused the wire to pitch to the right. If that happens to you, just slide your wire down and you're pitching to the left now. You're anchoring that wire to the left with your plier. And then go ahead and line them up. Get your flat nose pliers and go ahead and gently tap them down. And then we're just going to push them together. So when you're working with a thicker gauged wire, you want to stop more frequently and slide your wires together. So here's our little pyramid weave. Now I'm going to complete those 3 full rotations. 1, and then I'm going to push it back. Give it a little memory. Let go of the wire. Don't hang on to it until you get it through. You can use your thumb to push that wire in the direction that you want to go and then roll it around the back. Then get your pliers and slide it in. So now we're going to start that pattern again. And I'm going to roll my wire over, so I'm giving it memory. I'm coming back in between. I'm going to let it go so I have some slack. Then I'm going to push it up with my thumb, bring it around the back, pressing it around the back of that wire, come back over, give it some memory, slide it through, give yourself a little slack, and then push that wire up and then all the way around the back. And then you can just take your fingers, well, that's sliding down my rail there. I don't want it to do that. And just push it down. So now we're coming over all 3 wires again. So I'm going to push that over. Now what you could do is just bring that wire all the way around to create that perfect memory. And I'm just giving it a gentle tug. Then I'm going to push it in and then come all the way around again. My wire's tangling up down there. A little gentle tug, push it in, and then I'm pressing that wire in the back. I need to cut this wire. It's driving me crazy. Sorry, you guys. Hold on a second. I got to get it off the spool because that spool is dragging down. Okay. And then we'll talk about tying off again and cutting your wire, hiding your wire, etc. So now I'm going to go over wires 1 and 2, come in between wires 2 and 3. Let me get my tangle here out of the way. And then there's that slack there so that I can take the wire and push it up. And then I'm going to slide it in. So you can see how the wire, as it's thicker, has a tendency to want to naturally bow. So you can either use your finger to press it down. You can use your plier to press it down. And then that wire's got great memory now. So I'm coming around the back. I'm going to roll over again. I'm going to let go, give myself some slack. And then I'm going to push that wire in. I'm going to use my thumb. Then I'm going to line them up. Then we're going to do 3 full rotations. Slide the wire in, push it up and over, let go, use my thumb, and push it in. Then all you need to do is tap it down. You can keep your nail back here against your starting coils. Take your pliers and just slide it in. Did you see how much more they came in? Because our wires will continually want to slide. So you can always tape right here in the back to prevent them from sliding by marking your wire where you're starting your weave. So this is a beautiful pyramid pattern. So now let's talk about cutting your wire again. And then I'm going to show you the same techniques by using this wire. So I'm out the back, so we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to do it with the 26 gauge. Stay very close to your weaving where my thumbnail is setting. And right here, you just wiggle, jiggle, wiggle, jiggle, and you keep doing it, and that wire snaps off clean flush. You will feel nothing. So now let's say we're going to do a couple of coils. So I'm going to come up underneath. And I'm going to do, you're finishing a piece, you're coiling off, and you have your wire sticking out the back. So we've got our little coils. We're going to turn it over. And this wire is sticking out the back. So it's rolling into the back. So if you're on the back side of your weaving and here you've got this wire, and if you cut too close, it's going to stick up. So you want to take your wire. We've already pulled it through and showed you how to snap it, but that's okay. I want you to see it with the 26 gauge. You're going to take your wire and you're going to put some memory in that wire, and you're going to roll it in. And depending on how close your wires are, you're going to come down in between on an angle, and you're going to cut that wire to the inside. Now you've got this little nib sticking up on the top. Do you see that? And you can feel it. It's super sharp, right? So the technique is really in your plier use. You want to get your needle nose, and when you want, as you're grabbing the wire, you're anchoring off that wire, you want to roll. That wire will stretch. It will literally stretch and roll to the inside where you will feel nothing. So now we've got this one coming out the back, because this is your front, right? So the same thing, but this time we're going to do what we did before, because we want to cut this wire off on the inside on here so it's not sticking up. So we're going to roll the wire back out of our way, and we're going to cut on an angle. I'm going to get way deep down inside there, and I'm simply just going to snip it off. So now you can see that little nib, right? And it's the same technique, but this time you can't feel it. So all you're going to do is just roll this wire in. And if you can grab it, you're just going to slide off that tip. Now, if you feel it and it's sharp, you're going to take your pliers on the tip of that wire, and you're going to roll it. And then right on the tip, you're going to press it down. Now, I can't feel anything, but when we're starting out, we do. So all you're going to do is take your buffer and buff over that until you feel that that wire end is very smooth and you're not feeling anything. Even though it's cut off on the back, I feel nothing. So let's see, how far are we into this? Okay, I'm going to do one more technique for you. And I'm hesitant to use a 24 gauge, but I really want you to see the difference. So we started off, let's kind of do a refresher. We started off with 20 gauge wires with the 30 gauge weaving wire, and you can really see the difference in the thickness and the detail of our patterns. Then we moved up to an 18 gauge with a 28 gauge weaving wire, and then we moved up to a 16 gauge with a 26 gauge weaving wire. So the wire, the core wires that you're working with, I would probably never weave 30 gauge on a 16 or an 18, but that's me, and it's personal preference. My concern with using a very light gauged wire, weaving wire on a 16 gauge, is that it's going to snap. So you got to take that into consideration with what you're weaving and what you're making. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to incorporate a 24 gauge weaving wire. And if you guys have any questions, please reach out to me. And because if you'd like to see me weave or wrap with the half round wire, let me know, because that's quite a tricky wire to start with. So here's our 24 gauge, and that's a lot thicker of a wire, but it's going to be very complementary with the 16 gauge wire. So I'm going to cut myself just a nice piece of wire here as I drop everything all over. So this is going to really show you the difference when you're weaving, and it's going to show the difference in the way your patterns look. So I'm going to bring my wire, and notice how stiff this is. You see that? I'm going to bring my wire through. I'm going to hold it on top. Now I have to push a lot more. Your movements are going to be slower and much more methodical. You're going to really have to tell that wire where it goes. Look at the memory in it already, just from pushing on it and telling it where I want it to go. To where with the, if I could find that big strand of 26, let me show you the difference. So here's my 26 next to my 24. This wire has more flexibility. Even though it's going to pick up memory quicker, this one's really going to hold the memory. So you have to be mindful about that when you're working with thicker gauge weaving wires. So I'm just going to separate this out, and then I'm going to, see that kink in the wire there, that little bend? I'm going to use that to my advantage, and I'm going to push, I'm really pushing that wire over and telling it where I want it to go. I'm going to bring this around the back, and now you can see the difference in the 26 and the 24 gauge. So when you're working with 24 gauge, you're not going to work with a 24 gauge on a 20 gauge wire, or maybe an 18 if you know how to really control your wires. But when you're first starting out, that's not going to make any sense. But if you really want to train yourself, I would work with 16 gauge wires to practice on, so that you can feel the difference of all the different gauges of weaving wire. So I'm going to come over, and I'm going to come underneath. So I'm going back in between, and then I'm going to bring this wire up underneath, and see how it's got that memory? So I'm really giving it slack. I'm going to turn my wire, my core wires, in a good working position, and I'm going to slide that wire into place. And it's going to have a tendency to puff, so you want to really press that down. Then I'm going to come back in between. See the memory? How it wants to fight me? And then I'm going to just use my thumb and push it into place. Then I'm going to push out the back, because I'm going to use that memory and that wire to my advantage. I'm going to come back in between, and I'm going to roll over the top, straightening that wire out. I'm going to come back down in between wires 1 and 2, and I'm going to push that wire in. Now I'm coming underneath, and I'm pushing that wire against my base wires, and I'm pushing it over, giving it memory. And then I'm going to use my thumb to push it. I am not pulling, but I am anchoring that wire down. Then I'm going to do 3 wraps again. I'm going to push it into place, roll it over. You can always push it down if you want, and then bring it through my wires 1 and 2, and then push it into place. Now, when you're working with heavier gauge like this, you really need to be mindful about sliding your wires together a lot more. Now I'm coming out the back. I'm going to roll over, all the way over. Watch my gap space. I'm going to come back in between wires 2 and 3, push it with my thumb, and come out the back. I'm going to roll over again, back in between, push, come out the back, roll over, back in between. So I've got those in the position that I want. Now I'm going to bring that wire straight down in the back, and I'm going to come back in between, and I'm going to roll over wire 2, come back in between wires 1 and 2. And this is a really cool weaving pattern, by the way. And I'm going to slide that up and straighten that wire out in the back, because it's going to have a tendency to want to anchor to the right. So I'm going to come back underneath, back in between wires 1 and 2, roll over wire 2, all the way over wire 2, and I'm coming out the back. So I'm going to push up with my thumb, roll over wire 3, back in between wires 2 and 3, push up with my thumb, roll over, back in between wires 2 and 3, roll over, and back in between. So now I want to straighten this up, and I'm going to move this pattern away from the other one so that you can see it better. If I can, your thicker gauge weaving wire, especially 24 gauge, is going to be much harder to move and manipulate on your wires. So you want to be mindful about that when you're setting your pattern, where you want to line them up. I just want to get that out of the way so you can see this pattern. Now I'm going to line them up. So now I'm coming around the back, and I'm going to bring it all the way down to wire 1. I'm pushing that wire with my finger against the back. I'm going to roll over, and I'm going to make 3 rotations. Always leave yourself slack. Then I'm going to come around the back, come in between wires 2 and 3. I'm going to roll over wire 2, 2 full rotations. If you watch the way I use my fingers, and it comes with practice, y'all, so be patient with yourself. So now I've got my 2 full rotations here. Now I'm going to come all the way around the back. I'm rolling over that top wire. I'm going to come in between 2 and 3, and I'm going to do 3 full rotations. Now I'm going to line my wires up. So being a thicker gauge wire, you see that little bend there? It's anchoring. It's kind of, the wire on top is pushing to the left, right here. But yet the bottom of it is going to the right. So you just simply come in with your pliers and you straighten that out. Just straighten it out. And then you can just take your plier and slide everything together. And you want to do this every so many rotations because it's a very much thicker weaving wire, so it's going to have a lot of memory. So I've done my 3 on top, so I'm going to come back in between wires 1 and 2. And I'm going to do 2 full rotations around wire 1. So I'm pushing, letting go. I need that slack so I can push that wire up. My wire's getting a little short here. Pushing, coming in between wires 2 and 3, letting go, and push that wire up. And then I'm just going to line them up. So I'm coming out the back. I'm going to roll over wire 1, 3 full rotations. And again, notice how my hand keeps moving up. I'm staying very close to my weave. So I'm going to have to tuck this through because I'm losing my length here. So I've got my 3. If you find that your wire was a little loose or gapped in the back, you can just simply, this one right here has a little bit of a bow. All you need to do is get your pliers and roll it in. Just roll it in. Then line it up. I'm just straightening up all these wires, making sure that they're nice and lined up. It's a beautiful pattern. It would make a great bracelet. I've done this on 8, upward to 12 wires. So now we're coming out the back and we're going to tie our wire off in the middle. So I want to show you how to do that when you're in the middle of a wire. I'm going to have to tuck it through. Notice I'm always giving myself slack. This time I'm going to just push my wire through the back. I'm going to tuck it through, use my thumb to push it up, and then I'm just going to push my wire through the back. Then I'm going to tuck it through. Now I'm coming out the back. You can snap 24 gauge wire, but we're going to go ahead and cut it. So you can either cut it on the back, which is what most people do, or you can cut it on the front, which means you can bring that wire through one more time, but not complete the rotation. Some people don't like their wires cut on top. You never see it, but we've already cut the wire on back. So let's bring it through. Now I'm going to give some memory to this wire, and it's going to appear as if I'm making another rotation, but I'm not, because it's going to spring back very easily. So I just gave that wire some really good memory. Now I'm going to swing it out of my way. And I'm going to get my cutters, and I'm going to come way down. I really want that wire out of my way. I'm going to come way down in between, and I'm going to snip it. So you've got this little nib right there, but you can't feel it. You need really sharp, very fine tipped cutters. I've had these 3 years now, and it's only now that I'm starting to kind of put a little edge on my jaw, on my blade. And that's because I use these on 16 gauge, but 3 years. And they're far more superior, no offense, Xuron. If you notice the difference in the tip, these are much thicker, and they're also not super flush. So they're not really, in my opinion, very well made. These are heavy gauge stainless steel, and they're relatively inexpensive. They've got a wonderful stainless steel spring guard on it, so they're not going to stretch out, where this right here has this little tiny spring guard inside the handle, and already on 2 of my other pliers, it broke. So that just gives you an example of sometimes a super big brand name is not necessarily the best quality of plier. So you have to play with that a lot. So anyways, everyone, I hope that you enjoyed that. So let's just do a little flashback. We've got our 30 gauge on 20 gauge wire. We have our 26 gauge on 18 gauge wire. We have a 28 gauge on 18 gauge wire, 26 gauge on 16 gauge wire, and 24 gauge. Let me know what you would like to see. I'd really appreciate your feedback if you found this to be very helpful. Any other techniques or things you'd like to learn about weaving, or any struggles that you're having. Thank you all for being a wonderful part of this magical ancient art of wire. I wish for all of you all that you wish for yourselves. May you have a wonderful, magical wire art day. Bye for now.